It's the Locked On Flyers podcast for Wednesday, May 28th, your daily dose of Flyers news, analysis, and high quality content that's talking NHL Combine. And
Yeah. Good time of the year.
You're Locked On Flyers, your daily podcast on the Philadelphia Flyers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
hey there, and thanks for making Locked On Flyers your first listen every day. I am Rachel Donner. I've been podcasting about the Flyers, the NHL, and hockey for a decade, and I'm here with prospect expert and Flyers credentialed reporter for 19 years, Russ Cohen. To keep up with our latest episodes and Flyers news, you can find us at Locked On Flyers on Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and Twitter, as well as here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are going to get to your mailbag questions today, a lot of draft related ones that is relevant toward our combine discussion today. But first, we are going to talk about Ian Laperriere, which we talked a lot about on yesterday's show, but they officially announced on Tuesday that he will be transitioning to some sort of advisory role in hockey ops for Danny Briere and Keith Jones, which is obviously what we've been talking about for the last week or so, but now they've made it official. And I guess he kind of must have floated the market out there to see if he could get some sort of better role somewhere else, or like another stepping stone role, not necessarily better, but stepping stone role somewhere else, and didn't. So the Flyers are doing him a solid and keeping him in the organization, which we kind of assumed would happen, right?
We figured, yeah, he's a good organizational guy. I mean, he's got a better job than the guy in Office Space when they moved him into the basement. I'll say that.
That is fair. I think, the thing about it is that we did say that there's this narrow role that he could play and be really successful, whether it's helping to transition European prospects over to North America in the Flyers organization, or just help with player development in kind of a communication mentoring kind of way, and not necessarily an X's and O's skills kind of way. I think that's kind of his sweet spot, right?
Yeah, I think there's some on ice stuff he's definitely good at, but some of the off ice stuff is important. I mean, it's more important nowadays, and especially the more Europeans you bring in and just getting them settled and showing them the daily routine and what to expect and those kinds of things. That's a good role.
Yeah, and of course now that means they're officially looking for a new head coach for the Lehigh Valley Phantoms, and we've talked about several options for that, and another option that we didn't bring up in our most recent episode, because I do believe we've talked about him on past shows, but one of our listeners at Lucky Me said that he was really wanting Brad Ralph to be the guy who is the head coach of the Yep. So he's the head coach of the Florida Everblades in the ECHL, who's been extremely successful there. They won 3 Kelly Cups in that league. And the Florida Everblades, as of recording, were still in it. They may have been eliminated last night, but we don't know as of our recording, because Game 6 was Tuesday night in the Eastern Conference Finals for the ECHL. But he could be available very soon, and I certainly hope they talk to him, because he's a really good option.
Bring him in for an interview for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was a good call there by one of our listeners. Bradshaw is now officially an assistant coach for the New Jersey Devils, which is something we talked about that had been rumored. And I think it's going to be an interesting fit for him there.
It'll be a really good fit. Like, Sheldon Keefe is a really good guy, easy to get along with. They have a great stable of defensemen. They really do, but young, and they need some work and some guidance. And I think Brad will be very good at that.
Yeah, interesting that he's still in division for the Flyers there, and has some scouting reports on the Flyers blue line. That is for sure. So
that's for sure. That's the way it goes.
That's the risk you take when you let somebody walk like that. So I think that'll be a fun aspect of next season's Flyers Devils games for sure. Now, one of the other things that has come out recently is that the IOC has decided that Russia and Belarus will still be ineligible for the 2026 Olympics. They're going to appeal, but that is in contrast to what the NHL has
Hmm.
decided to do for its combine, in that they are allowing and inviting Russian and Belarusian players for the first time since 2019. And so, like, what do you make of the different decisions between the IOC and the NHL, and what that means ultimately for this appeal that could take place given the relationship that the two organizations have now?
I mean, other than the IOC stinks, and I've always had issues with the way it's run. Otherwise, they're great. The reason it's easier for the NHL to do this is because, well, for one thing, if you remember, an agent last year brought over a grouping of Russians, and after the
Mhm.
combine, all skated in Florida. Demidov was one of them, and if he could do that, why can't they do that for the combine? So it makes complete sense.
Right. And obviously, the NHL is a private organization and they can do what they want, right? I just think it's interesting that in all the negotiations between the NHL and the IOC to get NHL players back in the Olympics, you would think they would have been on the same page on this issue.
The IOC is never on the same page with the NHL, hardly about anything. If you remember, just so many things, making money on jerseys, all that other stuff. They just never are. And honestly, the appeal is going to mean nothing. They don't have enough time to have it
No,
appealed and have it changed. So that appeal is useless.
I think I agree with you there. I just think it's interesting that the NHL wouldn't have made that part of the negotiation when they were
Yeah, but they
talking
can't
about this.
negotiate on Russia's behalf, because then it's like you're negotiating for a guy you don't like either, and you know who I'm talking about. So it's their players, it's different. That's more
Right.
like a PA thing than a league thing, I think.
Yeah. Well, to be continued, but
Yeah.
in the meantime, the NHL Combine is around the corner, taking place from June 1st to June 7th this year. And we have talked about the Combine for the last several years as an
Mhm.
integral part of the NHL draft process, and how sometimes it can change the fates of individual players. So, like, big picture, what is the purpose of the Combine?
So big picture is, after a player's season ends, and have ended for weeks already. The lucky ones are still playing in the Memorial Cup, but before that, the U18s, and way before that, other seasons ended and teams didn't make the playoffs. And so these guys get to be in front of media, in front of agents, in front of teams. And so while the testing, I'd say there were about 4, 5, or 6 important tests. The interviews are everything. Now, these are not the first time teams are interviewing with most of these players. Most of these players they've touched base with 3 or 4 times during the year. That's how players, when they talk about it that day, end up saying, yeah, we spoke and I had a good feeling. And then we spoke again. But this is like their final exam of interviews. That's the difference.
Right. So, like, what does the flow of the week look like? Because that's a long period of time. Most people, I think, focus on the physical tests and, the wind tests that they do and stuff like that. But this is a whole week of activity. So, what does that flow look like?
Right. So they get there, they get to practice on the equipment. They interview with just about only NHL.com and maybe a couple of rights holders. The rest of the media gets frozen out until Thursday, but I'm not bitter about that. But otherwise, that's what they do. They do all that. The teams go in there. Teams will send certain personnel ahead of time, and then the GMs will float in there later in the week, because and especially if someone's like in Stanley Cup, like, they may not even go. They might just send everybody else on staff, and they might just go travel with the team with the cup, because it's unfortunate, but they overlap. And so that's another thing with the combine, is a lot of times there's a game that the day of and the day after, when the combine's going on and the Stanley Cup's going on.
Right. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot of divided attention here, but this is
Yes.
a very important process and a very important week for the NHL teams to really get to know some of these kids in a way that's beyond what they've seen from a press box or on the ice or from a stat sheet and see if they'll fit within the vibe of the organization. Right.
Yeah. I mean, when I interview guys all year, I keep notes on guys because there's things I like, there's things I don't like. I don't put it in the article, but I kind of bank it like a team would. So I kind of can have an idea when I do my list later in the year, like, who's aggressive, who's passive, you know, if they're asking what kind of tree they are, they're asking it for a reason. I know it sounds dumb at times, but, just in those rooms, they're going to have anywhere between 3 and 5 people, sometimes 6, you know,
Hmm.
team people, outside people who evaluate all those kinds of things. And they go over a strategy before they go. Uh, I remember one time their players were like, Steve Yzerman didn't say a word. I wanted to talk to Steve Yzerman, but he just sat in the corner and didn't say a word. Like, so there's weird vibes in every room, and every team has a different way of going about it.
Yeah, we're going to dig more into that and the physical tests and what all of that says coming up next. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts, and each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help you feel full longer. And personally, I love the no shells variety because I'm lazy and do not want to do the work for that myself. It makes it the perfect grab and go snack for my busy days and to have at my desk while I'm working. I recently reloaded on my sea salt and vinegar no shells variety because that is my favorite flavor, but there are so many good ones to choose from. Delicious and healthy too. Wonderful Pistachios is a complete protein providing all 9 essential amino acids. These little green wonders pack a protein punch. So get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. On our next show, we will continue our NHL draft coverage as we're stepping it up, doing at least 2 a week until the draft, if not more. On tomorrow's show, we're going to talk about Radim Merka, who has been a common request amongst
Hmm.
our listeners. So we're going to get to him. And we're going to talk about Henry Brushevitz, who is a right-handed defenseman who is a teammate of Oliver Bonk and Denver
Yep.
Barkey at the London Knights. So excited to talk about him as well. And as a reminder, we're continuing our off-season polls. And this week is, who do you think will improve most under new head coach Rick Tocchet? The link to that poll is in the show notes and on our YouTube channel as well. So make sure you get your opinion in there. So when we talk about it on Friday, your voice is heard. And we have our draft tracker. So if there's any of the prospects that we've talked about, you can see who they are and get a link directly to where we talked about them on our YouTube channel in our spreadsheet. The link to that is also in the show notes. So check it out.
Yeah, we
We're up
didn't start
to,
that list this week. We
yeah,
started it a while ago.
we're up to about 30 prospects that we've talked about. So a pretty solid list to draw from there. And a lot of those guys will be at the NHL scouting combine coming up later this week. And you talked a little bit about the interview
Hmm.
process and what it could mean and what it isn't. So how does that relate to the ability and what teams look for in a player?
Well, sometimes they'll go through like a video and kind of say, do a stop motion kind of thing and say, where do you think this video ends? What happens to in this play? And that's, decision making, problem solving. So that kind of stuff is important. And lately that's been a trend, I think the last 3 years, if I remember correctly, like teams have started to do that. Uh, Also, they're just looking for confidence. Being cocky in these interviews is okay because if you're
Mhm.
cocky and you could back it up, it's good. But but they still are looking for, guys who are humble, guys who are hardworking. They dig into their backgrounds a little. They ask them questions about their parents. A lot of times they want to know how tall their parents are. Have anybody in your family have growth spurts? Like, there are these things that come up that are, Riker Lee, as an example, told me in an interview that, he's still growing. So if people are worried that he's 6 foot, he might not be 6 foot in 2 years. So things like that become important, and they find out that information sometimes at the last minute, and then that could change things.
Right. I think also it can give you indications on how coachable a
Yes.
player is, right? It's like, how do they respond on the fly to
Hmm.
things? And can they synthesize information and spit something out in response that makes sense? And I think that kind of shows how coachable somebody can be.
Yeah. I mean, I had mentioned more than a few times, and they had Zach Benson as one of the main interviews as well on like that Thursday. Talking to him was like talking to a coach. Like,
Mhm.
he was that smart. He was that with it. He knew what he had to do. He knew everything. And, he's not the biggest guy. So of course, not big guys can make it. And he's been up with the Sabres, for 2 seasons now, and
Right.
starting to make an impact. And so that's a part of it. You could figure that part out, or could have figured that part out from just the interview process, never seeing him on the ice.
Right. Now, on the physical test side of things, obviously the wind test gets the most play, but there's a
Yeah.
whole battery of them in terms of height jump and long jump and
Yeah.
all of that. And there's sometimes I can see like the wind test what that does, because that shows
The
physical
VO2
fitness.
max. Yeah.
Right, the VO2 max, which is very
The
important in terms
Olympics do
of.
that. All the training
Yep,
centers have it. We have fun with it because we see who throws up, but honestly, it's to measure oxygen and when
yep,
you're under
yep.
stress and everything, and what a person can handle.
Yeah, we used to do something similar when I was training as a competitive swimmer, where
Okay.
you sink under the water, you blow out all the air you have, and then start swimming.
Oh,
So
wow.
you're on an oxygen deficit at that
Right.
point. So, and it's an anaerobic exercise. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's really, really interesting how they
Yeah.
they use this test. But like, how does it relate to the draft, and does that change anybody's minds about
Well,
any of these physical tests?
right. Well, I mean, you are seeing these guys for the last time. So, like, I always point out Mackenzie Blackwood just doing the whole broad jump, like he just racked it.
Mhm.
And, for a goalie, that's important, right? Core, quads,
Side to side.
yeah, those things, but also for players, speed burst, the core has become a lot more important than I think it was 10 years ago to teams. How's a guy's core development? How are the quads look? How do the calves look? You know, we always make fun of people with chicken legs, and I had chicken legs for a long time, and then I did work on them because it's like, hockey players, they're no different. Like, some of these guys, like Casey Middlestat, never did any weightlifting, never did anything. So, it took him years to kind of ramp up. Now, pull-ups don't mean anything. I used to be able to do a lot of them back in the day, and a lot of it was technique. Some of it was strength for sure. But Sam Bennett couldn't do anything, and Sam Bennett's okay now, right? So they've
I
learned
think
that
so.
that one, that one's not so bad. But you also, what happens on the floor is these guys get very competitive. And so when they're in groups, these guys want to be the best guy in their group, and teams look out for that too. They are looking for that competitive nature to come back. They do that start, stop running. I think that's important because guys who could start, stop, skate is a very good gift, because if you're just a good straight line skater, but can't like start and stop and get quick acceleration, then that limits you, right? So you could see some of those
Right.
things, and there are people there studying it the whole time. I drop in and there's certain events that maybe I'll look at, or certain players, and you do want to just see, like, yeah, how they look. I always ask players, you're fast on the ice, are you fast on the land? And it's interesting to see what they say about that. Some don't work on it at all, but more do work on that now than they used to, doing sprints and stuff, because they're finding that there is a correlation.
Yeah. Now, as far as all of this together and the Flyers in this year's draft, I think, we tend to look at who the Flyers talk to in particular for an
Mhm.
indication of who they're interested in drafting. Like, A, do you think that's still the case? And B, if you're the Flyers, who are you talking to specifically this week?
it definitely matters in the sense that, and I would say it's more after the first round guys, because the first round guys are, pretty buttoned down. But, there are other guys that may not fall through the cracks, but maybe they hadn't seen them lately, hadn't talked to them lately. So you want to see some of those guys. And I think when I interview, the crowds for the top 30 are massive. It's those
Right.
other guys where it starts waning, because when people are writing their articles, I'm still interviewing. Sometimes I interview people, I'm the only one interviewing. Sometimes it's me and Shane. Sometimes it's just three of us, and I could think of guys that you talk to like that, and you could be very impressed with. Haltonen is one who plays for London. I knew about him. I watched him, but after an interview, I was like, this guy, there's something with him. And I think he went to like the Sharks in the second round. It was something like that. And I do think that was a day where the whole day really helped him, because he's overseas. You see a certain amount, you don't see everything. I think that helps. I've been able to piece together for guys outside the Flyers and other teams, like, oh, they're interested in that guy. That's interesting. Now, just because they didn't talk to a player doesn't mean they're not going to draft him, because sometimes they talk to him
Right.
during the year. So if it's a potential first round pick and they haven't talked to him, I still think there's a chance they'll draft him. But if they haven't talked to, and you could just name a player who's a second or third round possibility, if they haven't talked to him, chances are they're not interested. But those first round guys, like they know everybody. Who should they talk to? Like, so there are guys that I think are under the radar. William Moore is this big center who played for the program. And I think, a team like the Flyers would look past the problems that the program had this year and why it was maybe their worst year, but it doesn't mean they're all bad players. Him, Jack Murtagh, there are some guys that you really may not go in the first round, may go in the second, that you really want to kind of look out for. Unfortunately, one of our favorites, and I interviewed him for an Elite Prospects article, Bruno Idjen, isn't invited. So he doesn't get a chance to do that. Does that mean teams aren't calling him? No, teams are contacting him anyhow because they know about him. So there's only an elite, like, what do I want to say, 65 to 75, something like that, they get to be in this event. But just because you are not in this event doesn't mean you won't make it either.
Right. Yeah, I think it'll be really interesting to see who the Flyers talk to and what you discern from the guys that are there in terms of what hints they're getting about where they're going to get picked. And so excited to talk to you with your reporting on the show as it progresses. Again, it starts June 1st. It goes through the 7th. So we'll be talking about it as Russ is there. In the meantime, y'all have some of those mailbag questions. A bunch are draft related. Some are reactions to our Mitch Marner potential free agency episode that were a lot of fun. So we're going to get to them coming up next. On that episode we did about Flyers free agency and what the overall big picture is for free agency this year and how that relates to potentially going after Mitch Marner. A lot of comments on that one, and most people, like I would say 90%, agreed that it was a no-go for the Flyers, and that's essentially what we said, that it just was too much money and not the right time.
Right.
And I thought there were a couple of really good comments that kind of synthesized what everybody was saying. So Daniel said, hell no, do not deviate from the path, especially when it comes to paying this much money for a player. He may be very successful outside Toronto, especially in the playoffs, but the time is not right for the Flyers to make this investment. And that's what I was saying, is that he very well could find success in the playoffs somewhere else, but doesn't matter. Now is not the time.
Right. And this is an immediate guy, and you do have strength on the wing. That's another thing that I remember seeing some of that too.
Yep. And then Jerry said, have to say no to Marner. I do like him, but not at this time. Don't even think the Flyers could afford him. But more importantly, they wouldn't be able to pursue any other options. And that is another important aspect.
Yeah, that's definitely going to limit them. I mean, it's a great thing to be limited by. But, if they were a couple pieces away, sure. It's a different story, though.
Yeah, I just think those are two very key points from our listeners
It is.
as to why we agree that they should
Mhm.
not go after Mitch Marner here. Maria emailed us and asked, do you think the physical style the Florida Panthers are playing during the playoffs is going to change the way GMs make their draft picks? Seems like size and physicality is becoming more important than skill.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question. I mean, that's where you get the Brady Martin stuff. And it doesn't mean he doesn't have any skill. He has skill. He could pick a top corner. But now everybody's trying to figure out, who's the next Sam Bennett. The problem with this, though, and there is a problem, this guy has to be like super high on the physical side and still very good on the skill side for someone to take him at 6. And so for like Brady Martin, it's still a no-go for me because it's still too soon because there's skating that has to be worked on. While he has this aggression, he's still 6 foot. It's not like he's 6'3" with this
Right.
aggression. And so I think these things come into play. I think it's easy to look at Florida and say, oh yeah, but Florida has a mix of players. And again, for people that thinking they're finding the next Kachucks, they're a little different than everybody else. Like the makeup of the way they're wired is different than everybody else. Plus, they're even
Which has
bigger.
a lot to do with their dad
It
and
does. It
how
has
they were
everything
groomed as
correct.
players,
Yes,
right?
absolutely. And I've spoken to Keith, and yes, it has a lot to do with that. So, and it's like trying to find the next Tom Wilson. So I get it why teams will sometimes gravitate towards that, but to try and just stock and trade copy a team is never a good idea in my eyes.
And it never works because the formula for winning always changes
It
because
does. Every
everybody
3 to 5
adjusts.
years it changes, and these guys are 3 to 5 years away.
Yep, exactly. So I do think there's a lot of people, to Maria's point, that will kind of chase that rabbit, but
Yeah,
I don't think it's necessarily the right way to go.
agreed.
Neil came to us with a trade proposition for some of the picks to shuffle them around that
Right.
was really interesting here. So he said in the 2022 draft, Arizona traded picks 27, 34, and 45 to San Jose to move up to 11th overall. Does for the Flyers packaging 22, 40, and 45 get them to that 11th overall pick? That way, Briere could come away with Frondell or Denoye at 6, Jackson Smith or Merca on defense at 11, and still have picks 30 to 32, depending on where the Oilers wind up, 36 and 48.
I don't think so. I forget who has pick number 11, but I don't think that is going to be possible because they'll make the offers like those
That's the
things.
Pens, by the
Oh,
way.
it's the Pens,
So,
so it's not going to happen. No, the
right. But
Pens.
somewhere around there, let's say in the 10 to 13 range.
No, I think 15 and higher, maybe, but I don't think they'll get into that area. I just don't think that that's going to be possible because there is a drop off here, and other teams are thinking the same thing. So I just think they're limited in trying to do that. Definitely try, but I don't think they're going to be successful, or they're going to have to give up something better than even what you've said.
Right. So I do agree with you. I think they should try and
Mhm.
see if there's a combination of picks here that will work because I do think, again, if they can hold on to that 30 and then have two of the second rounders left and get another high pick this year, I almost would do it for a pick next year, though, in some ways.
Yeah, I'm more inclined to do it for next year as well because it is a better draft. You don't know where you're going to end up. Yes, as fans, you could be positive about the team and hope that they're at least in the playoff mix. But if they drop out again and all of a sudden you're in the Gavin McKenna sweepstakes and you have, more than a few firsts, better to have it with that guy in mind.
Right.
Maybe
Right.
you could
And
trade then.
yeah, and I agree with Neil, by the way, that it doesn't make sense to use all of these picks in this draft. It makes sense to
No, I
use
agree.
some of them as capitals. So
Mhm.
I think that making an attempt to either move up like that this year or get another first rounder for next year, I
But you
think
have to
is
be
is
careful. Remember,
definitely worth it.
Montreal really screwed up in my estimation when they went and traded for Kirby Doc. I was not a huge Doc fan, but they're like thinking, well, we got this big center who'd be our second line center, and they gave Chicago a pick who's now Frank Nazar. I mean, you tell me, how does it look? It didn't even take that long.
Right. And so
You got to
I
be
think they're going
careful.
to have to be careful. And, whether you do that before the draft starts or wait until the first 5 or 6 pick, wait till the
Right.
Flyers make their first pick and then try and broker a deal like that. The strategy around it is going to have to be very, very precise.
Yeah, exactly.
Craig wanted to know what your thoughts, Russ, were on Vaclav Nestrasil, who is a right winger from Czechia. He played in the USHL this year for Muskegon, but
Hmm.
he's going to UMass in 26-27. He's also 6'5".
Right. So I saw him early in the year at the Fall Classic and was like, all right, But I do always go to the All American game, and they had a skills session, and really just Mike and Morial and myself were there. Nobody else was there. And Nestrasil was one of the guys doing like the weave poles and other things. And I was very impressed from what I saw then compared to the beginning of the year. Not so much, that's not a speed thing. It was more like his edges and a little bit of dexterity and stuff. And I thought he had more going for him than he did at the beginning of the year. So then, yeah, with our meetings for Elite Prospect, he has come up and he has definitely
Mhm.
moved up in rankings. So would I take him at the end of the first round? I'm still not there yet. Would I take him with my next second round pick? Yeah, maybe, because there is something there, but it's going to take a while. Like, again, he's not even going into UMass until the year after. So he's going to probably be back at
Right.
the USHL. And then you're talking 2 years in college, a year in the AHL. So that's where you have to be careful. It's like, do you want to spend a first and wait 4 to 5? I'd rather spend the second and wait 4 to 5. And if it could be the second, great, but he may not last until then. It's possible he can go before then.
Right, and that's where the strategy that we were just talking about with
Yes.
those second round picks and using them as assets
Yeah.
versus taking picks, like that's going to have to be a precise strategy to get
Yes.
who they want. And to your point, there's a lot of upside about this guy, but he is that long-term project. But if they draft somebody else in the second round who's going to be a shorter term project, then it works, right?
Yes. And this isn't like the NFL. The NFL has a card that teams have that says what picks are valued at. And so there's like almost like a guide. And I've heard it quoted more than a few times. The NHL does not have that because the NFL is more of a complete thing. Like, you look at the guys, they're more completed. They've gone through college, sometimes 2, 3, 4 years, sometimes 5 now. You don't get that long to look at these guys before you draft them. So
Right.
different than trading in the NFL and the draft.
Absolutely. All right, that will do it for today's show. We will be back tomorrow to talk about Ronnie Murka as well as Henry Bushevitz. Really excited to do that for our draft profile coverage. And as a reminder, we always want to hear from you. So if you've got prospects you want us to do a deep dive on, or if you've got questions about the Flyers, let us know on any of our socials at Locked On Flyers. You can email us at lockedonflyers@gmail.com or comment on our YouTube channel. I'm Rachel. I'm on Blue Sky and Twitter at rmiriam. That's RMIRIAM.
I'm Russ. I'm at Sportsology on the same socials, SPORTSOLOGY.
Thanks for making Locked On Flyers your first listen today. For your next listen, check out the all-new Locked On NHL Game Night. It's every game, every night until a Stanley Cup champion is crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale with NHL Game Night on Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Have a great day, everyone.